We're chatting here today because something that I really have enjoyed chatting to you about is on the concept of personal branding. What is it that prevents people from building the personal brand that they want to build in order to achieve whatever it is that they want to do? More visibility, more career opportunities. And so we had some interesting conversations in the past. And so we obviously can't replicate those. I wish we'd recorded them, but maybe we can launch into a bit of a discussion of, what feels scary, what feels like people maybe get blocked about when they think about building a personal brand, and like how can we enable more people to step into that online presence that they want to create without cringing to death, essentially.
Cringing to death is definitely the fear. So relatable, right? Like I'm still looking for those answers. So I'm also looking to learn from you about those things. We've known each other since high school. We've reconnected like just completely by chance, right? Like more as a friend, but it really wasn't until like the last couple of years that you started showing up in my LinkedIn feed that I'm like, wow, like look at you. You're putting yourself out there. You're really doing this personal brand thing.
What was actually like your first reaction when you started seeing me in the feed? Like totally honestly, what was kind of the first thing?
Yeah, so this is actually really, really interesting to explore, right? I think when I first started, I was like, wow, like what's Lana doing? Like this is really different, right? I was like, oh, this is out there. And then like almost right on the heels of you starting to do your activity, I got introduced to a book called, it's like How to Be a Badass or something like that. I don't remember exactly the title. It's one of those law of attraction books, right? One of those books where the philosophy is like, if you put your intention in it and you send the message out into universe, it will happen. But the way she writes the book, it made me really think, because, like law of attraction's a little woo-woo, right? Like, sure, very new agey. But I think the psychology of it is probably very sound. And that was something that triggered me to think about it, which is, if you put your intention out there and you make those commitments, you're more likely to psychologically compel yourself to be like, oh, let me go towards this goal. So in this book, I came to this like really interesting insight, which was if you have a negative reaction towards something and you want to ridicule or criticize it, it's probably because some part of it resonates and you might even be jealous or envious. And I thought, wait a minute, what? Let me, and I paused for a second and I realized that, I've wanted for a really long time to, like have my own blog, right? Like have my own website, be recognized for something. I just haven't figured out what that thing is. And a lot of that paralysis is really, born out of a poor perfectionist tendency, right? Where I get paralyzed because of perfectionism. And so as I was mulling on this, I realized that I actually did, this rang true, this insight ran true for me because when I looked at other people's personal websites or their blogs or the content they create on LinkedIn and they share things and, and I'm like, I have this innate negative reaction where I'm like, psh, I can do better, right? But I haven't done it. So I can't actually say I can do better. The only reason I'm saying that is because I'm scared to try, but it's way easier for me to say, to look at someone else's work and critique it, right? From this like high and mighty position on like my imaginary horse and be like, oh yeah, I can do better. When I get around to doing it, it's going to be so much better. But actually I haven't gone around to doing it because I'm so scared that every single time I sit down to try to write something, I'm totally blocked and I'm scared of putting myself out there. So I've not done it, which means I don't actually know that I can do better. I just want to comfort myself and say that. So that was my first reaction, followed quickly by the realization, which then led to like just way more admiration, right? For the fact that you were courageous enough to put yourself out there. And I was like, oh, now I have so much more appreciation. Around the same time, I was kind of reading a bunch of different things. And something that also struck me was, a lot of times you're afraid of, right, have definitely experienced this in the last few years of my life where I'm like, oh, I'm too old to do X. Right? Or like, oh, I missed the boat on X. Like, oh, I missed a boat on of having a vlog on YouTube and being discovered, right? Oh, I'm missing the boat on becoming like TikTok viral. Like, oh, I'm too old for whatever, right? The insight was basically, if you're afraid of doing something or starting something because you're going to be too old, well, in 5 or 10 years, you could either have started doing it now and have done it for 5 or 10 years, or you would be 5 or 10 years down the line and still not have done it, right? You're still going to get older. It's just a matter of like whether you can still start now and be okay. And I was like, oh, that's true, right? Like I look at someone on the ski slope and I'm like, man, if I'd only started snowboarding at 3, imagine where I'd be when I'm 18. But like, well, you could start when you're 30 and you could still be there when you're like, 50, right? Like, eventually it will catch up. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I should not let like that be an excuse to stop me from trying things.
I totally identify with that because that was something that I believed as well when I used to look at entrepreneurs doing all these crazy things. Number one, I thought that you had to just be born into an entrepreneurial family, or you were special or something, or you were an engineer, because way back, I think most of the engineers, they were creating some kind of inventions, right? I didn't know that there were these online internet entrepreneur things, but I thought that too when it was like 3-4 years ago. I just kind of assumed that it was too late. You know, I hadn't built my first business before 25. So it must be too late, right? And it wasn't actually until I started getting into the entrepreneurial space that I started realizing that actually, when you look at the data, most successful entrepreneurs are actually in the middle stage of their life. It's actually quite rare to have 20-year-olds and 22-year-olds building these businesses. And so I think there's something, and I still to this day, and I will continue to feel like I'm late on certain things. Like, for example, I want to start a podcast, but I want to have like a proper audio podcast. And something that's always in my mind is, you know, I can't start it right now. Maybe I'll start it in like 6 months. And I feel like, is it going to be too late? But likely it's really never too late. And sometimes I get really paranoid about, you know, like, what if I have a family? Like, I have to do everything before I start a family and build all these businesses and stuff. But then I'm constantly hearing about women who are in their 40s or in their 50s and they've just started building their business, right? And so I think it's so easy to get caught up in a feeling of it's too late. And I think that's also a comforting thought, you know, because if you think like, oh, I'm too late, you're kind of off the hook, right? You're like, it's not my fault. Like, it's just, I missed the boat. No one told me.
Shucks. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, oh, that's too bad. Like, I guess I won't have to do all these like 89 steps, right? So I think it's a comforting feeling to make ourselves believe that it's too late. So I'm actually curious, when you were talking before saying that, you know, you're seeing me kind of put yourself out there and like you want to put yourself out there, but you're scared. I'm wondering, is there anything different in terms of putting yourself out there online versus in person? Because we went to high school together and, you know, we were in a lot of classes together, and I always felt like you were a very, you know, you had a definite personality. You put yourself out there. You shared your opinions openly in class. Like, you were very opinionated. So is there something different about maybe online versus in person in a community that you know? Is there something there?
I don't worry so much about the community that I know, but I do worry about whether or not I'm able to see my audience, engage my audience response. And I think that I think that like subconsciously makes a huge difference to me. I did a lot of debate. I've done a lot of public speaking. I am not uncomfortable standing up in front of strangers.
And you're a great speaker. You're a very good speaker.
Thank you. Right? Like I will dance down the aisles of supermarkets and I don't care. Right? Like, I don't really care what strangers think of me. But also, like, in that supermarket example, I can see your response and I can respond to that response. Right? So like, if you're giving me like major side eye as I like dance down the aisle and talk to myself, I have a choice. Right? I can choose. I can be like, hey, how's it going? I could ignore you. I could stop. I can walk properly again, like a normal human being, right? Like, I could do all these things to counter and continue to shape your perception of me. So yes, like within a community of people, you know, like, obviously you feel safer. For me, it's being able to see your response and then adjust to it. And I think what's really scary about content creation, the way it's happening now, is that once you send it out into the world, it stops being fully your narrative, right? And you can try to clarify and you can try to add on to it, but like, it never works quite as well. And if you look at where, like, just in the zeitgeist, right? Like, there's cancel culture, people apologize, but like, you know, there's that, like, oh, that's super scary. There's also like just interesting, and it could be a good or bad thing, right? But like, it's out of your control. Like, if you make a TikTok video and someone, or even like a Instagram, whatever, right? Like, you do all this content and people can do like a video on top of it. There's a term for it.
The stitch, yeah.
Right. There's a stitch. You can like you can remix with it, right? Like, someone can like take your YouTube video and it's very popular on TikTok where someone's commenting on top of someone else's video, and it could be, you know, it starts a dialogue of a different sense, but it's not a dialogue, right? Because it's someone commenting. They can be full on bashing what you're saying. They could be twisting your intentions and your words. and you'd have to remix another video back to respond. But it's not a dialogue. It's not like a real
Not
exchange of
everyone's going
idea.
to see every part of the
Right,
dialogue, and you're
exactly,
worried
exactly.
these things are going to
You can
offshoot
take
where
things
you
out of
can't correct the
context.
narrative.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. You can take things out of context so easily, right? You can never be concise enough to say everything you want to say in one sentence, and even if you did, you can just take the second part of the sentence, right? Like you can start with a sentence that says, like a qualifier, say something slightly more controversial. Well, we'll just edit out the qualifier and now you're full blown controversial, right? So I think that's what worries me is that like there's so much editing and like it's just out of your control. And I worry about how I'm being perceived and not being able to see and respond to that perception that's happening.
And what's kind of the consequence that you're afraid of that? Like someone misperceives you, they twist your narrative somewhere, let's say on YouTube or a TikTok video or whatever. What do you think is like so what? What's the fear of what that might lead to?
Not being able to recover from it, I guess.
Like personally, emotionally?
Reputationally. I think it's interesting, right? Because we live in a time and age where you can almost reinvent yourself, but like, this is my name, this is my face, this is my voice, right? And it's like, there's only so much reinventing you can do from that, I guess. In a way, like when I think of like, I think I didn't mean to bring up cancel culture, but like now I think it's a pretty good analogy, right? Like it's very fragile because now you can see when people like celebrities, well-established celebrities, can say one or two controversial things, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like their contracts got dropped and they don't appear
It's like
places
Will
anymore.
Smith. Like all I can think about when I see Will Smith is that thing that happened, right? And
Right?
it's going
Like,
to be
yeah,
hard
and
to
yeah, and
recover
like
from that.
and like all you can remember, you don't even remember what like Will Smith, everyone remembers as a slap, right? Um, I find myself constantly saying, because I don't really follow the news like I don't follow celebrity news very deeply. So like I find myself constantly being like, wasn't there some controversy about Whoopi Goldberg? Didn't Gal Gadot get into something? I thought there was something with so and so, and I don't remember what it was. All I do is remember like potentially something vaguely negative that's super undefined that may or may not have been cleared up, but I didn't follow the news to find out, and then insert name of person, right? And I think that's superhuman, right? And like I already by a quick survey of like the people I've always like that I surround myself with and people I've come in contact with, I think I pay attention to detail and I hold on to detail. Like my memory for things is stickier just because like I tend to hang on to things. So God forbid, like like you'll be like, wasn't there like like some Angela person and something like, oh, did they say something about like whatever it is, right? Like it's like people are probably gonna get it super wrong. And then where would I be? You know what I mean? So like I think that's what I worry about.
Because people aren't reading things thoroughly anymore. They kind of just operate off these little like fragments.
Right.
And then they just run with a tiny fragment, and now that's your whole definition, right?
Right, exactly.
What
So I
about
worry
what
about
about if kind of you knew that there's a large portion, like there's a bigger portion of people who are paying attention to you in detail and they do know what you truly are? Does that make you feel better at all? That maybe there's these kind of, fringe people you can't control, but really your
Yeah.
loyal followers are going to get the right image of you. Is that
Yeah.
comforting at all, or it's
That is
still a
comforting.
concern?
That is comforting. But I think in a place of anxiety, you're staring at the one person who's falling asleep in the stadium rather than everyone else who's nodding along, right? And
Yeah.
also, before you get onto stage, I'm not such a I don't know what the right description would be, but I'm more like if I'm imagining something and I'm fearful about the future, or like if I'm just imagining about the future, I tend to more catastrophize than I will like imagine things going well, right? Like I'm a very weird person in that like um, even as a child I daydreamed a lot, but like I will have to confess a lot of my daydreams are like disaster management daydreams.
Dang.
It is very strange. It is very strange. It's like it's not the whole like, oh my God, what if I walked into class and all of a sudden I was naked kind of thing. It's not that. It's like if I'm at the beginning of a good relationship and I really like someone and things are going well, I will start daydreaming about like really awkward and terrible breakup situations where I'm almost like role playing how I would handle it with like the kind of poise and dignity that I would want to walk out of that okay. And it's almost like practice like practice shitty situations until like when you actually hit it, you can be like, you know, dignified and poised. It's a thing. I don't know. You know, so like when I think about like putting my content online, I'm not imagining once I hit send or like publish, right? Like all the claps and the likes and the positive comments. In my head, I'm only seeing trolls, and how am I going to respond to these trolls?
Mm-hmm. It's
So,
interesting. There's a book. It's called something about wisdom and happiness of Buddhism, or some kind of something with Buddhism,
uh-huh.
basically. And it's
Yeah.
like the psychology of happiness. And what it talks about is this concept of a simulator, where we go into a simulator in our mind, where we're basically simulating the future.
Yeah.
And when we're in the simulator, because we evolutionarily are trying to get away from threats more than go towards, good things, because we're just trying to not get killed by a bear or like
Huh.
bitten by a snake. Most of the time when we're in the simulator, we are in disaster mode, because that's
Oh,
what we're
interesting.
programmed to worry about. So evolutionarily, we have a tendency to
Huh.
worry about the worst case scenario when we're
Right.
imagining things in our mind. And then there's also the whole movement of Stoicism back from like the Greeks, where I think it was Marcus Aurelius, where his whole, like the whole kind of Stoic philosophy
Yes.
is, don't torture yourself with some kind of pain that might happen in the future, because you don't know that it's going to happen. So if it's gonna happen, you may, like, there's no point in torturing yourself for longer. Like, just give yourself some time to maybe just live a happier life.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if it doesn't end up happening, you will have tortured yourself for no
No
reason. So
reason.
we all fall prey to this. I mean, I
Yeah.
get into disaster mode sometimes, but I find like just doing a sanity check, where it's like, okay, I think I'm in the simulator right now, because I'm simulating things are really going to fall apart. And that's kind of the worst fear that people have. So it's interesting. I think the general worst fear that people have when they start to, put themselves out there and they're going to post content is, oh, like, no one's going to see it.
Right.
But the
Interesting.
good
Oh, okay.
news, but
That's not
this is
my
my,
fear, but okay.
so your fear is more extreme than that. You think people are going to kind of bash you.
I've not really thought about it. I mean, I guess I worry that no one's gonna read it. I almost anticipate no one's gonna read it though, right? Because like I also know that like you can't go from 0 to 100. Like it's like, well, if I don't have a following, then no one's gonna read this, which is almost demotivating too, because then it's like it doesn't matter if I do or don't post this, right?
Mm,
And it feels pretentious to post something that is that is like written as if it's geared towards a bigger audience until I have that audience. And I think I've never quite figured out getting out of that conundrum. I'm trying to unlearn a lot of perfectionist tendency, like a lot of perfectionist like beliefs, right? And this is definitely one of them, where like, oh, I want a very big following, but like in order to get to a big following, you have to incrementally grow a following. I can understand where I am is 0. I can understand where I want is 100, but I cannot fathom the in between, right?
it's
Or
the
the in
chicken and
between
the
feels
egg
comfortable.
problem,
Yeah, yeah,
basically.
yeah.
You want the following, but in order to do that, you have to get started, but you don't want to get started because no one's really listening, right? And it's
Right,
embarrassing. It's
exactly,
awkward.
exactly,
It's like you're
exactly.
standing on a stage, but no one's there. And then
Right.
some people can occasionally see, like, oh, like they're standing on this
Ew,
stage and they
that's
think there's all
weird.
these people, but
Oh, they
there
must be a
isn't,
really
right?
bad comic. No one's sitting there listening to their show,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, like
And
how cringy, like they're
yeah.
out there.
Well, in reality, I also know that like you need that practice, right? You need to stand there in front of 3 people, then 5 people, then 15 people to test your jokes. Because God forbid if you started by standing out of like 500 people and then you bomb, well, now you're really like now your life as a comic is dead, right? Like if you were doing stand-up comedy. So you do need to like you need to practice your sets. You need to come back. You need to like rewrite your punchlines. Like, it gets harder to put yourself out there, to put yourself in a position where you're experiencing failure. And it really requires you to have a very strong growth mindset and a clear sense of like self, right? So I think that those are also important. Which, I mean, I know like you've done a lot of this. I mean, when you first hit create, do you still remember like when you first hit send on like your first piece of content, like how you felt or what you were
I
afraid of?
do, yeah. And so the interesting, and this is kind of why I started with LinkedIn. And I think it was all very subconscious when I look back, I don't think I was being very conscious about it, but subconsciously, the reason that I had started on LinkedIn was because I had an existing network. It was really small. I think I was under 500 connections back then, but I sort of had a few people, you have your old coworkers, you have your existing company.
Right.
I think my first ever proper post on LinkedIn was actually in October 2019. It was, I think, 2 months into a new job that I was working where I was running this innovation team. And actually, I kind of did feel like I was the shit. Like I wasn't really, but I think that was the first time where like I was kind of new in the company. I was coming in with a lot of experience as a product manager, and I had been handpicked to be put on this innovation team where we were basically kind of like the special team in the company. Okay. So I had a lot of confidence. I mean, not that I had confidence as a personal brand, but I had attended this like event that we had at the company. It was some kind of like an open house or something, and I had taken a picture. Good. Yeah, like, and I had taken a picture of myself next to this like thing that we had on display. And I think it's true. Like I did feel in my element. And so I was just like, I'm just going to post this on LinkedIn. Cause I think they were like, oh, if you post it on LinkedIn, like use our hashtag or something. And I wanted to impress them. I wanted to be like, yeah, like I'm in the company culture. And so I think that was my first ever post. And I got decent engagement just cause like I had my company was obviously going to like my post because they wanted that. And I had a little bit of people in my network. And so that's why like I do recommend a lot of people get started with LinkedIn because likely you have some sort of a minimal existing network, a few people that are even going to give you like some pity likes, in the beginning, it's like, we'll take the pity likes, whatever, just just egg us on for the fact that we've gotten on there. So that was really kind of like the first post. But after that, like I wasn't posting regularly at all. That was like a once in a blue moon post. And then the first kind of like real post that I made as like a creator like per se.
Conscious, deliberate post.
Yeah, where I was like, okay, I think I'm going to start posting now was actually, I don't remember like exactly what the earliest one where I was like, okay, it actually got good traction was, I think it was again, like I felt good about myself because I was still very early into my entrepreneurial journey. This was like 2020. I felt like the ultimate imposter. I had absolutely no identity because I had quit my job. I'd never been an entrepreneur. Like it was just a complete like disaster. But I was doing a little bit of mentoring on the side because like people were reaching out to me like a little bit on LinkedIn and just because I was a product manager and so everyone wants to talk to a product manager. So I'd been mentoring this guy a little bit on the side and I just had like a few really good sessions with him and I think I just felt really good about it. And so I did this post where I was just like, I've been mentoring this individual. This is kind of like a, a result that they've gotten recently. And I'm just really happy for them. Like, I'm happy that I can like share my knowledge. It was the typical, like, I thought that I was useless, but I actually did one good thing for a person. I guess I'm sort of like worthy. And I think
the slight humble brag, but actually genuine one.
Yeah, right? I was like, kind of like, I don't think I'm the shit at all, but like this one thing, it's like, okay, I'm willing to kind of go to town on this. Yeah. But it actually went really well. I think it was sort of like, it actually sort of went like viral for my standards and that gave me a lot of confidence. But I do recognize that because a lot of the questions that I get on TikTok, for example, where people are very opinionated about like personal branding and LinkedIn, one of their biggest objections is like LinkedIn is only for people who have like existing expertise, existing experience, like existing confidence. I do understand
confidence,
that.
I can understand that. Existing confidence, I can understand. I just want to say like at this point in my life, I figured out that like nobody knows what real expertise is. It is scary to me what is considered expertise in this day and age. And I'm like, oh, maybe I just had too high a definition of what expertise is, but I feel like expertise is a really loose word. And the more I grow up, the more I realize that like I've put the word expertise on a pedestal that it doesn't share in other people's minds.
Yes. I think and maybe it's like our generation, but I do think that it's almost like we need to over deliver on expertise. And these days it's like if someone literally went, if let's say next week, Monday, they're just like, I'm going to just start getting into cold email and I'm just going to send a bunch of cold emails for 2 weeks. And then they create a post on LinkedIn or Twitter and they're just like, hey, I've sent 100 cold emails in the past 2 weeks. Here are 7 things that I've learned. That person will actually get perceived as an expert. And honestly, I would actually look at them as sort of an expert because they know more about cold email than me. I haven't sent 100 cold emails.
But then
And
I'm
it's
gonna be
crazy.
Yeah, but then I'm gonna look at someone who's been in like sales and business development for like 5, 10 years, and I'll be like, well, this person's the expert, right? Like they know more than this like one-shot experience.
I think it's how you describe it because, for example, to me, if you tell me, hey, I have 10 years experience in business development versus, and that's all that you tell me, like I know how to cold email because I have 10 years experience in business development versus someone's like, hey, I'm sort of new, but like I actually sent 100 cold emails in 2 weeks and these are the results that I got and this is what I learned and here's how you should structure an email. Maybe it's in the delivery because I'm more convinced that you've actually done the work. And I think the other element is when you're someone who's done something for the first, like my biggest mind-blowing kind of light bulb moment as a creator, early creator, was when people were like really interested in what I had done, even though I was a total beginner and I had essentially gone from 0 to 1. Like I wasn't really anyone on LinkedIn, but very early on, people are like, oh my God, like how do you start posting content on LinkedIn? I think it's more empowering to hear how someone has taken the first few steps. Because if they like, you know, went to some creator with 100,000, it's like, hey, how did you get started?
They're too far from that
Here's like a,
beginner
you know,
part.
72 step, 3-year blueprint. Like you're just going to pass out looking at that versus you see someone, you're just like, hey, like I've never seen you on LinkedIn before, but like now I noticed that you started posting twice a week. Like, how did you do that? It's a lot easier to, and also the key thing here, which a lot of people forget, is they just did it. So the environment in which you're going to start doing it is very similar, right? Someone who did it 5 years ago, like it's probably not going to work for me because times have changed. But when someone has taken those first few steps, and also I think it's
More
less,
relatable and it's more about it sounds like it's more about the lesson learned, right? It sounded about less about like, oh, I have expertise because I have lots of experience across time. It's more about like telling you the lesson learned.
Yeah, show, don't
like
tell. It's like, tell me what you've actually done. And I think that's kind of my biggest tip for people because a lot of people get really hung up with like, oh, but I don't have 5 years experience. Oh, but I don't have 7,000 followers.
Yeah.
I see people going, not that you need to go viral on LinkedIn. I don't care about virality, but like I do see a lot of people getting some crazy engagement for their posts. And I go to their profile and they have like 1,200 followers on LinkedIn, which is like, you know, not like super high in the grand scheme of things. But it's like because they've written it in a way where they're just like, this is what I did. Here's the actual meat of what's happened. You're not just talking the talk. You're not just, because also it's really like, it's not appetizing to talk to someone who's like, I have 7 years of experience. And it's like, okay, well, good for you. Versus someone's like, hey, like I've actually done this like 7 times. This is how I've done it. Here's how you can do it too. It's just a lot more like accessible.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's interesting because I think we definitely are living in a time where a lot of the things that I think people gravitate towards is more lesson based, right? Like more bite-sized, more accessible, like more like what can I take from what you're saying that what you've tried and like learn that lesson, apply in my life, which come think of it as like the ultimate goal, right? Of like, that's how you're supposed to fast track. The whole point of like networking and sharing experience is that. And to your point, I did find like when I was in university and I was told to go like coffee chat and informational interview with other people, the hardest conversations, and this is also why I hated networking events for a long time. Not, well, I don't know if I hate networking events. I just like felt that they were useless. It's like I didn't mind them, but I was just like, I don't know what I get out of this. It's because the context is so far away, you know? Not only is it artificial that we're going to context, but it's also like, okay, so this is your title, this is where you work. Cool. I don't particularly want to work in your field. I don't really know a lot about your company. And we're in this like weird artificial setting where like we don't have really anything to anchor on or share about. So it's like, cool, we can have a great conversation. I can carry a conversation fine, but I don't know what I'm supposed to follow up with, right? Like, how are we going to develop a relationship where I email you every 2-3 months? Like, what am I supposed to say? And I always found that part of networking particularly like strange and strenuous and artificial because there's no context. Whereas what you're saying is that's like the person with the 7 years of experience, right? It's like, oh, I've done a lot of like, I'm very experienced, I'm director of XYZ, versus talking to someone else to be like, oh yeah, I just tried this. Oh, that's cool. Like now we have something more to go back and forth on. Sounds like that's
Yeah.
sort of where,
I feel like people
yeah.
just get, and I see this a lot even just with, like LinkedIn profiles, for example, like people get really hung up on their title. And they're just like, they
Mm,
think their title defines them. And that is, and it's almost like that's like your elevator pitch. Like they're just like, oh yeah, like
yeah.
I'm a product manager at Meta. And it's like, really? Like that's all you are?
We've culturally spent, like North American culture in particular, right? Like is so heavily hinged on what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Totally.
it's been cool to see people say things like, "Oh, recovering lawyer," or like "mom," right? Like, dog mama or something like that. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Like, that's definitely like, a newer trend, right? A younger trend. But I think like people, when you meet someone, you're like, "Oh, nice to meet you. What do you do?" Right? And
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
that still is like something that people will lead with. And so very much our identities in North America is tied up, not just your identity, your personhood is tied up with like your profession. And if you have a profession that people don't really understand, then pass next, right? Like it's very much immediate that way.
Totally. Like it's basically like a closed door. I mean, even if you're at like a dinner party, let's say someone, they're like, what do you do? Someone's like, I'm a
Yeah.
lawyer. And it's just kind of it's like a
Ooh,
conversation
lawyer.
closer.
Yeah.
It's like or like, oh, I'm a surgeon.
Yeah.
It's like because it's so easy to understand, it doesn't really, there's no intrigue, like, or when someone's just like, oh, I just have a business, or like, I run a company, or, I mean, even that's a little bit, you're kind of like, like what kind of business? But some of the ways, and that's one of my kind of gripes as well with, even just not beyond LinkedIn, just how people
Hmm.
position themselves is, it's not like don't position yourself in a way that closes off the conversation unless you really don't want to talk about
Hmm.
it. You're just like, I don't want to freaking talk about my stupid company because that's all I freaking do all day.
How would you like if you wanted to talk more and you wanted to go in, like what's your intrigue? Like and do you ever worry that it's too showy? Like just tell me what you do, okay? Like why do you have to be so mysterious about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes back to, instead of talking about your, like, I am this title,
Hmm.
maybe even just describing as, this is how I help people, So,
Oh,
for
interesting. Okay.
example, if you're like a lawyer, let's say maybe you say like, hey, I help immigrants stay in the country so that they're together with their family. Like, I'm a
Hmm.
lawyer, but like that's essentially what I do, right? And that now
I'm
opens
an
a
immigration lawyer.
conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like, oh, like, I'm an immigrant. Like, my mom was deported. I don't know, I'm making this up, but it's
Right,
like
right, right.
you're giving them these kind of little like leads to go off to continue the conversation. And what they
Interesting.
are is they're descriptions of what you do that talk more about kind of like the human element of what you do, right? Like, you're not just,
Interesting.
a doctor, you're not
You're
just
not
a
a thing, right?
surgeon. Yeah, it's like, I help people, live a longer life with pacemakers or something like that, right? Like there's always a
Interesting.
good way to describe what you do. The title is like the easy one, right? And especially because we
Hmm.
get asked it so often, that's the fallback option. But I think there's an opportunity to have a richer response. That's more of a conversation,
Yeah.
like a dialogue, right?
Interesting. I actually find, I spend a lot of time wanting to get into consulting, right? And now that I'm in consulting, I actually do find that I never can introduce myself with my title because nobody understands what a consultant does, right?
It's so vague,
And
yeah,
so when
yeah.
people are like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, I think I normally just say something like, I work in consulting and I mostly work with pharma clients. Right? Like
Mm.
because I'm never gonna like I mean, come on, like talk about conversation like killers, right? Like talk about like just like if you say like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a senior consultant. It's like, okay, what the heck does that mean, right? Like worse, like, oh, I'm an engagement manager. I'm sorry, come again? Like what do you do? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually do find that I find it a lot easier to have to explain a little bit of what I do or like I work as. And I do try to put an emphasis on I work as because that's just what I work as, right? Like there's a whole other side of me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah.
yesterday I was talking to someone yesterday who asked me what my philosophy was as someone who works with data and like data reporting and insights and analytics. I mean, after I clarified that I am not a data scientist, I realized that I do have a philosophy about data. And I said, I think um, the ideal purpose of like data science, right? Like, or anything reporting and metrics related is to help you get an understanding of the past so you can make decisions about the future.
No, I
right? So
like
that
that. I like
that
that.
almost
Yeah.
sounds like very much what sounds a little bit like that. I help people live a longer life with pacemakers kind of
I
thing.
think generally what people struggle with is their elevator pitch. And you just kind of give me an idea for like maybe like a potential workshop of like helping people come up with better elevator pitches for
Oh, I think
themselves
people need help
because
with that.
yeah,
100%.
because again, like I think it's also when you don't have a good elevator pitch, you default to answering in a very flat way. And I
Yes.
mean,
And
sometimes
then you
we do
ramble.
that. Yeah, exactly. Like, but sometimes
Yeah.
we do that when we want to blow someone off. Like, we're just like, you know, oh, I just have my own business. It's like, I don't want to talk to you, just go away. But when you actually want to talk to someone, but you don't have the elevator pitch, you're just like, oh, you know, I'm a product manager in fintech. And it's just that because you're not proud of your elevator pitch, it shows in your voice, and that closes the conversation, right? So I think finding a way to like weave your elevator pitch also with, like you said, it's not just about what you do in your job, but like weaving your elevator pitch with, you know, like this is what I do to run my business, but like, you know, I'm like, for example, for me, like an elevator pitch might be, you know, like I help people better market themselves and their businesses on LinkedIn so that they can, you know, get more freedom. I also do TikTok on the side. Like I like creating content. So that's kind of like my professional elevator pitch. And like you can always wrap it with more kind of personal things. But I think that's something that people really, it's hard to summarize yourself in like 2 sentences, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that to go back to the beginning of like talking about personal branding at all, right? That in and of itself causes a lot of paralysis because it's distilling you down. It's again,
Yeah.
it's creating an image for consumption. It's very limited, right? And I feel like I think part of it is because we all feel like, oh, we can't be limited by
We're so
500
much more
words,
diverse than like a
right? We
two
can't be limited to
sentence.
3,000 characters. Like, what am I supposed to do in like a 30-second video, right? Like, and I think that's part of the struggle is like really clearly identifying whether it be values or, you know, values or skills or whatever we want to know ourselves at and say like for this context this is my package.
I think
It
something
is
that
hard.
just came to mind is like a lot of people feel the pressure to summarize themselves in an elevator pitch, but an elevator pitch is not your summary. It's actually a hook. It's a hook and a conversation opener. So it's an invitation to learn more about you. So you want to load the juiciest parts of you so that someone's like, oh, tell me more. And now you launch into like a 15-minute discussion about
But
like,
do
you
you
know,
worry? Do you worry that you've given away the juice? Like what if I have a really good hook and I've got no substance to back it up, right? Like
I
I'm
think
all
that's
show
a
no
false
substance.
belief. I think everyone has like more substance to share. I think it's some kind of imposter syndrome
Oh
because if
yeah.
you're able to come up with like a juicy hook, like I mean, yeah, like very few people I talk to, in fact, like don't have much like substance to back things up. Like I think it's just about getting kind of clear, just taking an inventory of like what are the awesome things, because like oftentimes when you're put on the spot, for example in an interview, like, you know, what are your biggest accomplishments, you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know, like this one thing. But if you actually sit down and you're like, okay, let's go through every single job that I've had, everything that I've done with friends, every year of my life, chances are you're gonna come up with a lot more than you can think of immediately. I think we're very
Yeah.
blind to
We
and throw in
are.
the fact that we
Yeah.
discount half our experiences. Like half my clients are just like, oh, that's just a startup that I ran for 3 years, but I didn't incorporate it, so it doesn't matter. And I'm like, you made $500,000. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, obviously it's legit, right? So,
I don't
yeah.
ever feel like I can bring my personal life into interviews. Like, like immediately, those are not accessible examples. And then the other thing I think that happens is I do get very hung up. Like, even though I understand the intent of the question is just tell me an example of X. If you say like you're most challenging or you're most innovative, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting really hung up on this word, and I can even verbally acknowledge it, but I can't get over it, right? Like I've been in interviews and I've said like, wow, like it's not that innovative what I'm about to tell you, but like I'm getting really hung up on the word innovative. I'm gonna tell you this example, but like here's my caveat: it's really not that innovative, and it's like I'm underselling myself before I've even told you the story.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of like innate discomfort with like marketing and what it means, right? That's out there that needs to be unpacked. I know
Yeah, yeah.
I know I have a lot of that. So
Yeah, I mean, we all do. It's a lot of resistance in the beginning, but I think once you start doing it, you get a little bit more comfortable, and as you start getting kind of like the positive feedback and the feeling that like, okay, it's not weird, people just kind of appreciate it. It kind of like greases the machine, but I think making those first few steps is always the toughest.
first few steps is the hardest. Yeah.
But yeah, no, this was super, honestly, like so insightful for me just because it's been a while since I've taken my first few steps. So always looking to get into the minds of, yeah, people who are, you know, not at my stage just yet, but I'm sure will be looking at you.
Exploring first steps, Okay.
Yeah.
Point
But
taken.
yeah.
Well, thanks
Thanks
for
so
your time.
much for joining me, Angela. This was super
Yeah,
fun.
it was fun.
Yeah, maybe we'll do some more in the future.
Sounds good.